Excellent. Right, very, very warm welcome to all of you. We are in the process of setting up the next series of STA Tech Talks. If there is anything any of you would like to learn more about, please do get in touch, give us a shout. We are reaching out to the skilled volunteers in the community to do talks on various bits of tech and various topics. For example, one of them will be around Zero and a few of the applications and software that small charities tend to lean on, but equally we'll be diving into more TypeScript, JavaScript, PR reviews, and how an easier way to set up code when you're volunteering, which is different to a 9-to-5 job when you're all sat in the same office. But without further ado, Jen, who is a very active volunteer working with a lovely charity called Working Families, has kindly offered to share her expertise on data visualization. So a very warm welcome, Jen, and thank you for offering your time to the community.
Cool. Okay, let me do the bit that's usually the most panic-inducing of sharing my screen. So just while I poke those buttons, a little bit more of an introduction from me. I joined STA this year. I am as I put it to Joanna at the start, I'm a recovering project manager in theory, but with an emphasis on data visualization. So I've kind of been doing both parts of that and have ended up kind of having a lens on accessibility in data visualization for a number of reasons, and finding that it wasn't something that was widely talked about, certainly in the industry I was in. And so just finding more opportunities to see, do other people know about it? If they do, love to hear from them as well. So today is going to be a very kind of high level, here's an introduction to some of the principles around accessibility. We'll talk about the definition of accessibility, my own experiences with particularly digital accessibility. If there are any web designers in the room, some of this may be like teaching my granny to suck eggs, apologies. But I do use a lot of the principles around web accessibility as inspiration for what we use in the data visualization space. And we'll just talk on a little bit call to action at the end, what else we can do, things you can think about. So opening up with the definition of accessibility. So accessibility is a practice of making information, activities, and environments sensible, meaningful, and usable for as many people as possible. So in wider terms, when we talk about maybe physical accessibility, we think about ramps into buildings, accessible toilet facilities, large print documents, or subtitles on TV and films. Translating some of those tools into digital accessibility, you can have things like screen readers, literally what it says on the tin, will read what's on the screen, voice control of applications and software, things like color contrast standards, which we will touch on, and also how you navigate through screens. Not everybody uses a mouse to navigate their screen. But in addition to that, sorry, my screen's not doing what I want it to do. There is also what we kind of refer to as situational impairments or accessibility issues that may not occur all the time, but can still make content, material, anything inaccessible. So thinking about things like different devices, whether you use a mobile or a tablet or a laptop to access something digital, if that experience doesn't work the same way in all situations, you are making something a little bit inaccessible. Also thinking about changing abilities due to age or even illness, situational limitations. So sometimes what a medium that you might use, you can do in one situation is not usable in another. So the best example I came up with for this is I have a friend who works in theatre, and we were in a chat group and we were just basically chatting shit, and me and another friend just kept sending voice notes because we were being really, really funny and we thought it's funny. So we kept sending these voice notes, and our friend Kate eventually messaged and she said, I'm sat in a dress rehearsal, I can't listen to any of this. She could have read text messages, she couldn't listen to voice notes, and we'd inadvertently, if that had been something important, it wasn't, we'd inadvertently made it inaccessible to her. So there are situational limitations on how we can interact with digital content. And also the final thing, which I'm sure we've all experienced, even things like slow internet connection is making information inaccessible to some people. And that can be, it just happens on one day, or you might just be in an area where you don't have access to that. So that's just that rough concept of accessibility, and also how that translates to a digital world as well. So moving on then to my own experience with accessibility. And I meant to touch on this before. I know some of you put cameras on and you don't have to, you're lovely. If you want to hit emotion buttons, if I say something good, bad, or you're indifferent to it, that's also super helpful to me, and a little bit of experiment for me doing things virtually as well. I meant to say this at the start, but that's one of my own experiences with accessibility about how I can interact with things more easily. So experience of accessibility run in my family. I, like probably a few people, I have an elderly mother who has severe visual impairments. I have a daughter who has dyslexia and ADHD, and I have ADHD myself. So a lot of issues of accessibility run through my family. Only really started to turn into something was when my mum started to suffer from these impairment problems. And we ran into things like not being able to read her bank statements. And I went, so fine, there'll be an alternative for this. And the alternative for the bank statement was a CD. Brilliant. 78-year-old visually impaired woman can't read her bank statement. She's going to be able to press the button on her Alba CD player. And it was only then when you start to see some of those personal experiences, you go, oh yeah, that's not as clever as they thought it was. And then coming to my own ADHD, starting to find there are ways that I interact with information that means it might be great for other people, doesn't work for me. And so that's what we're going to talk through a little bit now. Just to put it into context of my ADHD, there within that kind of neurodivergent space is this concept of executive functions, which is helpful for how I explain things. These are little things we all have. There are ways we make decisions, how we behave, how we process information. And for some people, we have weaknesses in these executive functions. So for example, I have a lousy working memory, the ability to hold information, doing complex tasks. So a set of instructions, incredibly difficult for me to follow. My husband loves that. So anything in a list, follow these steps, I find it really difficult to process that. Goal-directed persistence, sticking to a goal to its completion, also find that quite difficult for me to do as well. Sustained attention, absolutely not. One of the kind of core ADHD values, paying attention, continuing to maintain attention, regardless of distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. So these are just some of the areas that I struggle with in terms of ADHD, and how that translates now into how digital things become inaccessible. So I'm guessing some people in the room will be familiar with Stack Overflow. Now, I'm a feral Tableau developer, as well as being a recovering project manager. And a lot of times I'd be like, how do I do this in Tableau? I'd end up on Stack Overflow. As an interface of information, this is awful for me, because I can see there's titles at the top, there's screenshots, there's some information, there's an advert here, all very common things in web publishing. It just makes it really difficult for me with my ADHD to get to the thing that I need to use. So in general, if I Google a question and Stack Overflow's at the top of the list, I don't use it. What I do like, and this is not a big sell for Tableau, this is a Tableau knowledge base database. This to me, with my attention problems, is beautiful. It's very clear where the question is, what it's referring to, where the answers are. All of the steps are very straightforward for me to follow. There's a little bit of information over here that I probably don't need for the context of what I need to do, but it's not so distracting that I can't follow these through. So that's gone from something digitally that's not great for me to improving. And then finally, although I don't use this website, it is still a little bit best in class, which is the Zara website of all things. So if you go on Zara, there's a little man, and you can't see it on my screenshot, there's a little guy in the corner, he's the accessibility dude. So if you click on him, and I'm going to say him because they've shaped it as a man, it comes up with this list of accessibility tools where it will adjust your experience with the website. So under ADHD, there are focus options where it creates a band of color in the website. So if you were reading a lot of text, you can have focus lines, focus colors, those kind of things. And as you can see, there's a whole load of other accessibility tools that you can pick and choose exactly what you want to do. Some of these tools actually exist in assistive technology as well, but if you don't have that on whatever device you're using, to have them built into a website is a huge step forward. So if you want to get some context around digital accessibility tools, and there's probably even better websites than this, I do recommend going to the Zara website. So that's just to give some context about how my disability, my impairments kind of affect my digital experience. Beautiful. So coming on, thinking about that web experience I've talked about, for kind of one point of reference, web content accessibility guidelines, a completely inaccessible set of words to say in one go. Again, some of you who are web developers and used to this will be familiar with them as WCAG. These are a set of international principles, guidelines that are there to make websites accessible. If you go into WCAG, there's a lot of stuff for if you are a web developer about standards and things you need to adhere to. What I've done with them is I'm using them as inspiration for data visualization as well, because they're a good starting point and there's no point kind of reinventing the wheel. So their high-level principles is that content should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And we'll go into each one of those. Now, I've put a little caveat at the bottom here, and I'm in no way expert or legal advice on this. These are international guidelines. Within the UK Equality Act of 2010 and the Public Sector Bodies of 2018, there are specific legal requirements around accessibility as well. And I suspect there's a crowd here that know a lot more than me about those, but it's just something to think about if it's new to you, that there are, although the WCAG are guidelines, there are legal requirements around accessibility. So we're going to take those 4 values and apply them to data visualization. So perceivable, information and user interface components must be presentable to users in ways that they can perceive. Again, there's a bit of a caveat here. I'm Tableau girl at heart. I'm trying to make this kind of less Tableau orientated as well. Some areas will be referring to Tableau, but we will talk about how you can apply them very much to other applications used in data visualization. So information can be perceivable through sight, hearing, and touch. So straight away, we talk about visualization, it's almost, we can only think of it as being a visual tool, but we need to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we present that visual experience. So I have done things in the past where I've packaged a visualization, a dashboard with a narrative voice file, and that has been what has been made available to people. If you're presenting your visualization, you can talk it through. That's a great way of adding that hearing part in. But, and it's difficult when you're talking about visualization, is how can you enhance the visual experience for people who are not primarily visual processors in any way? So say adding sound can be a great way to enhance a visual process. Touch is a slightly more difficult one. We don't have vibrating dashboards yet. I'm assuming at some point someone will do something where you hover over a thing and it buzzes at you. But it's just starting to think about perception, particularly in visualization, making it not only visual without losing some of the benefits that visualization gives us. Moving on, thinking about then how screen readers work with your visualization tools. There are various screen reader applications. Some will be built into your laptops. There are other ones that you have as different assistive technology. So when I kind of looked at, I've used VoiceOver on my MacBook, and I used to think about using this as part of the demo, but when a screen reader reads a screen, it will read everything. And if it's something you're not used to, it can actually be quite an overwhelming experience. So it will say window, text, group, then it will read out the text that you're actually seeing. So screen readers kind of, I think there will be multiple screen readers and they will interact with different visualization tools in different ways. So my suggestion here is to try and understand whatever tool you're using, how can you best understand how a screen reader works with it? In general, you will need some text with your visualization for a screen reader to work. Tableau certainly doesn't read graphs. It will not tell you that box is 5 units high. Tableau can only read text. So in general, you might want to think about, how do I include explanatory text with my visualizations as well? And I've just touched on that. And again, this is for some of the Tableau users in the room. I assume everyone has a concept for visualization of big ass numbers. We put these big numbers at the top of the screen. In Tableau, if you create them in certain ways, a screen reader will not be able to read those numbers. You have to look at using different tools within Tab to do it. So if you've got a preferred tool or you're learning a new tool, it's worth going away and finding out, how does a screen reader interact with that? Moving on then, one of the other kind of areas that are around perception and perceiving data, color vision deficiency and color contrast. So CVD is kind of, I don't know if it's a new term, it's basically a term for color blindness, where a key problem is that there are people who do not see colors in the same way as the majority of the population. So for example, when a lot of us see green and red, we see them as 2 different colors. People with color vision deficiency will see them as close, colors that are closer together in some way. And it tends to focus on red and green. There is blue-yellow color vision deficiency as well, but that's much rarer. But it's starting to think about when you're creating your visualizations and you're using those colors, are they actually the most perceivable colors as well? Equally, color contrast is this concept of colors that are contrasting to a point that people with low vision can easily tell the colors apart. There are various tools, if you Google color contrast on the internet, and I have actually got a good one specifically for visualization, where you can compare, there's like a golden ratio you're supposed to have between one color and the next color, where you can compare those colors as well. So it's starting to think about when we're using color in visualization, which we all do, are those still perceivable visual colors? And I think I've got a couple of examples here. Now, this is not a skill class in visualization in any way. I've done very straightforward visualizations just to help me make a point. Someone did once say to me, like, if you're doing visualizations that are not for your work, visualize something that you love. So I went and looked at my Starbucks spending habits and went and got data from my bank account to then visualize it for the purposes of this. So this kind of first graph would be talking about, I wanted to know how many times or what year did I spend less than 50 quid on a Starbucks, and I made that green. Now, I know in some cases that's perfectly understandable. Green is good, red is bad. For people, for example, with color vision deficiency, they will not see that same level of contrast. So it's not the greatest interpretation for them. So I just played with it a little bit in terms of adding in things like a legend with some text. Again, depending on how a screen reader might read that might enhance the experience or it might not. Also simply changing colors so that you have a color that you've still got that difference, and we naturally gravitate towards red and green for good and bad, for whatever historic reasons, but changing colors so that you can still show that one value is different to other values. And then a final example I had was I put a reference line on and then absolutely hated it and have refused to take it out to punish myself. But you could put a line somewhere in it so that you're not reliant on color as being something that differentiates between two values. So that's just to think about when you're using color in your visualizations, is it to create difference or are you using it for another purpose? Moving on then, our next principle is around operation. So user interface components and navigation must be operable. Keyboard focus. This is again something to think about for people who are using screen readers or who do not use a mouse to interact with their information on their screen. If you tab through a screen, if you do it in a screen reader, it should run in a logical order. So it will go left to right, top to bottom. In some visualization tools, when you're building dashboards, it doesn't necessarily automatically go. If you had 4 visualizations, it will not necessarily tab in the right order. That's definitely an issue I've had in Tableau. I think that has been updated in a more recent version. But thinking about if people are interacting with your visualization, not everyone uses a mouse to do it. Some people use tab keys. So are you making sure that that flows and works for them as well? Links and interactions, are they descriptive and are they obvious enough? So I didn't know this and used it for ages, was the click here button. Everybody click here. Accessibility wise, that doesn't mean anything. What's here? Where's it going to go to? What's going to happen to it once I've done something with it? So if you're using, again, interactive dashboards in your visualization, you might have links and those kind of things. Are they descriptive and obvious enough that if someone clicks on it, they know where they're going to go, what's going to change in their dashboard? And equally, do you have a way to reverse what they've done? Again, a Tableau point, they have a revert button and a back button in their browser version that do 2 different things, but in principle, you think you're going to get the same thing out of them. So where you're using links and interactions for interactive experiences, is it clear what's going to happen when that interaction is used? Filters and parameters. I love filters and parameters and interactive dashboards, giving people the option to drill down into their data from lots of different views, drilling up the way, drilling down the way. But I know I have absolutely been too smart for my own good, and I've made experiences more complicated by trying to deliver people this lovely interactive experience. It is possible that it's better to deliver, let's say, a selection of fixed views of data almost in like a slide type approach than it is to ask people to interact with complex drop downs, or drop down here and then a little filter task over here and all of these kind of things. It's very easy to get stuck into them, and people do use them, but thinking about, are they absolutely needed, or are we making it more complex for people? And then just touching on speech recognition software, not something I've explored. I know there are things like Dragon, I think, is a commonly used one. I need to go and find some users of this to talk to me about it. But is there things within your visualization experience that are going to be made more difficult for people using speech recognition software? This is where I'm definitely not an expert. It's just trying to plant those seeds of ideas in people's heads of different ways to operate an interactive dashboard. Moving on to understandable then, information and the operation of a user interface must be understandable. So this is more naturally aligned, I think, with visualization. For those who are hardcore visualizers, you may already know about data storytelling principles. If you're not, we can definitely find context for that. Is people are starting to talk more about not just putting a graph up on the screen and saying, I have told a story with this graph. Things like using text titles, descriptive text around graphs, regardless of whether there's assistive technology, that might just make it more understandable for people who are using it in some way. So if you can go away and look at, and I think Storytelling with Data are a great org, do a lot of great content, and any like sort of usual visualization gurus, should we say, people will start to talk about data storytelling. Tables as well as charts. I've said a heavy sigh here. In my original visualization days, I was taught that you were never to give people a table. Visualization was with bar charts and those kind of things. Thankfully, I got re-educated on that. What I wouldn't say is, if you've got a large complex data set, do not put a massive table of data into a visualization with your graph, because that will potentially make it even less understandable. But if you're talking about aggregated data sets or summarizing data sets, it may be that having a table of the data next to a chart of data is just easier to digest for some and just more understandable for people. Reducing interpretation. This is kind of like when we go back thinking about my lovely Starbucks graphs of like, if the bar is bigger, is that good or bad? Should it be negative? And all of those kind of things. Again, this gets into good visualizing and data storytelling. But if you've got a very clear picture you want to tell, there's an A or a B part, then maybe take E, D, F, trying to remember the rest of the alphabet. Think about how you can simplify it so people aren't distracted about the data around the actual picture you want to do. So if you've got 5 data points and only 2 of them are important, just have the 2 that are important showing. It makes it a lot clearer for people. And this is just personal Sankey chart related rage. Now, I know maybe not everyone in the room knows what a Sankey chart is. Tableau have added this recently as a function. This is a Sankey chart, and everyone's really excited about it. And I hate them because I don't think they help people when they're used in the wrong context. So a Sankey chart should tell a story of a journey. If someone starts at A, they go to B, they might then go to C or D. And it's designed, I think, for things like user journey analysis. People have found them terribly exciting and started using them for lots of other use cases. And they're not necessarily the best tool. The one on the screen at the moment, all this is supposed to show is amount of sales versus the type of sales. I don't think a Sankey chart is what's needed, and I think it makes it more difficult to be perceived. In some cases, a Sankey chart will be right. Behind my Sankey vendetta is just making choices about the type of visualizations we use, to maybe not go for too much flash and go for a little bit more substance based on our audience and the message that we're trying to deliver. If you're doing something pretty and glorious and you really want to engage people at the first hit, it might be that more aesthetic visualizations are the way to go. But in general, that day-to-day translating data to people, try and keep it as simple as you can. I've now vented on my Sankey chart rage. A last of our 4 principles then about being robust. So content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. So we've already touched on some of this. Does it work on all devices, mobile, laptop, and tablet? You can instantly lose information. And even if you convert to mobile, if anyone's done the scroll of death on websites or any kind of form as well, sometimes that change to mobile makes a process more difficult to interact with. It's not to say that you can completely avoid that, but it's to think about, do I need to change how this thing looks to make it interactive on all those devices? Error handling, this is, I think, just naturally good etiquette, but not necessarily something that, because data visualization maybe isn't treated the same way as some kind of web builds and that kind of thing. If something goes wrong with your visualization, or someone doesn't understand, or it doesn't deliver the result they expected, for example, what alternatives do you give them to be able to understand if that's a problem? If there's no error message, but it shows 50 when it should have showed 100, what kind of tools can you use that will help people? You can do things like providing an alternative link to the data source, depending on your tool. Go like it, go build it yourself. But you can do even little simple things like, who to ask if there is an issue. If your visualization is going only to your mate who sits next to you at a desk, you don't. If you're publishing to large audiences of people, you don't know the name of everyone you're publishing to, then you might want to make sure there is some kind of contact or here's who to ask type thing on your visualization. How does it interact with assistive technology from a performance perspective? While I was still in the banking industry, I did get given assistive technology to try and help me with some of my attention problems. But what I found was that it churned away on a terrible laptop on a lousy internet connection as well. So it's a difficult thing to test, again, depending on scope and audience and those kind of things. But if you say you build a visualization and it already chugs along a little bit because you've got a really large data source or you're doing complex calculations, while it may only be in itself on your little laptop a short delay, start to think about how that might stack up for someone who is trying to use assistive technology on top of that. Okay, that's all the good points. Now down to what else can we do? Perfection is difficult to achieve, but at least start to think about it, talk about it, and show it. So I should say this, I'm not an accessibility expert. I'm using my own experiences and I'm using what other people have told me about. The whole area is huge. So it's not that you're going to make something accessible at the first time of asking or even at the 50th time of asking, but it's starting to think about it, be aware of it, and talk to other people about it as well. If you're in a world where you have endless budget and people willing to spend money, there are accessibility consultants and accessibility testing organizations that will do all of this for you. I have seen that. It is very pricey and it is, but it is very helpful. They go into a huge level of detail as well. So if you have access to loads of money, that's something you could do. User interviews is probably one of the most important things and should be when you're doing data visualization anyway, in the same way we do any web design or user journeys, those kind of things. Asking what your user actually needs. And it's not a case of going, are you colorblind? Do you have a color vision deficiency? Asking questions like, how can I make this as accessible as possible for you? And making sure that one, you're delivering the thing that they really need and that you're delivering it in a way that they can understand as well. And it's interesting, we were touching on brand guidelines in a little warm-up. I was very lucky, I was in a large organization that had brand guidelines. Everything was already color contrast tested. So I could use exactly what was there for all of my visualizations. If you're just doing this by yourself or you're in a smaller org that hasn't done its branding exercise yet, maybe don't have access to a Helen, you can work those things out yourself. Look at the color contrast, pick some colors, make sure those contrasts work, and just keep using them and stick with them for everything. Again, it's not the most creative, but getting yourself into that habit of going, I've got a standard, I've got my own standard, and I'm going to work with that, and it is accessible, it saves you a lot of hassle. And that's from someone who doesn't like actually picking colors at any point. And you are consistently making what you're building accessible as well. So I think that is all of the key points covered. Just to go over as a little refresher, what we've talked about that concept of accessibility. It goes beyond just disabilities And it's about making it as accessible for as many people as possible. That's not making it accessible for everyone, as many people as you possibly can. You've learned about my accessibility experiences, so you can use your own. And again, it doesn't have to be that you have specific accessibility needs. You might have family members, you might have friends. Even when you start to think about, I don't like things in that color, you're starting to think about how you best process information so you can apply that to other design experiences and learn from others around you as well. Keeping the web accessibility part in mind, remember those core principles and think about how you can apply those to your visualizations. And just that final point is there's no single answer to solving specific problems as well. Regardless of the tool you're using or whatever it is you're creating, and all these tools are actually very creative now anyway, is if you can't think of it, someone else will have thought of 20 different ways to do that. Use your Googles. If you can read Stack Overflow, use communities like we have with the STA as well. There'll be other people in here who are much better skilled at this than I am as well. So don't feel, if you feel you've created something and you're like, this doesn't work, it's not doing what I want to do, don't lose hope. There is no single answer, and there will always be someone who has another answer for you. That, thankfully for you guys, is all of my talking. I'm absolutely open to questions, comments, thoughts, and emotions. There is somebody in the chat, and I don't know if that's relevant. Spot on visual information. Thank you, sir. So yes, sorry, that's everything from me.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Jen. What a great run through, and touched on a lot of topics there. Does anybody have any particular questions? You can either put your hand up or just go for it. Any questions for Jen?
On board with Sankey Hatred, yes, 100% here for people to tear down the system as well. Olivia, you've got your hand up.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm quite interested in accessibility in general. What I read, so I'm still a junior, so still lots to learn, of course. But I wondered whether in your experience you've dealt with accessibility approach for light sensitivity, because I've heard it can be a problem as well, but I haven't found out how that can be dealt with. Any ideas?
Yes and no, as I probably wouldn't have attached it to light sensitivity. The other thing I haven't included in here is there will be things around light and dark mode where people prefer that dark background versus a white background and how they perceive information. And I think there is also something around yellow backgrounds can be easier for people to perceive with very specific conditions. My daughter has a thing where she has a yellow overlay. Whether those things are related to light sensitivity, my expertise stops at I know the colours we talk about. I can definitely do some digging and see if there's any other expertise, but there will be something that says actually people who don't like a bright white screen create a dark mode version of it. I did do it as an example for something. I had two of the same dashboard, one that went light and one that went dark. One of the problems you get into is then getting the text color to be a text color that's then perceivable as well. So I think I've not seen a specific do this for light sensitivity. Definitely aware that there are screen colors that people find easier to perceive or not. But I'm now going to go away and ask people and research that. Brilliant question. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your answer. I know
No
this is still fairly new, I think, to software to be thinking of all those aspects. So there's still lots to explore, I'm sure. So thank you very much.
No problem. And Ema's added that. Thank you. She has a screen mask to make screens dimmer and prefer dark modes as well. So yeah, thanks for backing me up, Ema.
Rebecca has her hand up.
Hi, yeah, I guess I had a thought off the back of the conversation about light sensitivity that then does lead into a question, because I have a similar issue with kind of epileptic and neurological history. I find that colors with really high contrast, particularly if they're more towards the sort of neon end of the spectrum, that can be quite triggering. And so for me, it's like putting the shortcut into grayscale and things like that. And so I was wondering if you had any more thoughts about you know, accessibility is sometimes used as such an umbrella term, and it's like, oh, well, now we're accessible because we did this one thing, and it's aggravating when you know, when companies use anything as a tick box. But what do you have any thoughts on those instances? Like, how do we try and find those balances? So like, oh, but some of us are light sensitive, some people have low visibility issues, and would that be, you know, like incorporating a 2-option dark mode switch on everything with different textures? What's your thoughts on that?
I think I agree with everything you say in terms of an umbrella term, for sure. And I think it's one of these things is accessibility. There's so many levels of nuance to it. And one of the points I meant to add into this as well is all of this applies to your Word documents and your Excel as well. So I think one of the starting points is almost like going back to first principles. When we teach people how to use things, is we teach people how to copy and paste. I'm assuming like when they're in nursery now. I was probably about 22 when I learned how to copy and paste in Excel. Is I think we have to think about, from a technical perspective, we have to start teaching people to think that you're one experience and you have to think about these things differently. Like I had a spreadsheet at work, your high contrast thing, where they'd done like lime green and purple, and I don't have a light sensitivity problem. It just, excuse me, it screwed with my focus so much. I sat and cried at it. I was like, I can't fill out your spreadsheet. This is silly. So I think it's making it part of when we're teaching almost like office culture, organizational culture, is starting to go, that thing you really like, that font and those kind of things that you like, that may not work for other people. So it's more making it like a generalized part of the experience of dealing with people who have slightly different needs to you. I had another girl who was talking to me at one of these things where she needed the light screen and her colleague needed dark screen, and I think they just argued with each other and just kept changing the thing, and I was like, there's got to be a better way to deal with that. But conversations about it can help as well if there's a way. And this is kind of what I'm trying to do a little bit with this, is people won't have noticed that they need to change these things. I don't know I've necessarily answered your question there. I was trying to be very agreeing. And I think it's more than just an umbrella activity. We have to change the behaviors to say, your one instance, my one version of the world doesn't work for everyone, because there'll be thousands of people who like Stack Overflow and I'm like, burn it to the ground. So yeah, I think starting to change people's thinking from early on going forward is one way to tackle that.
Thank you.
No problem. Agent.
I was just about to say.
Sorry, actually trying to get anything to work on my computer is a nightmare at the moment. You touched on various aspects of neurodiversity. Actually, looks like someone's also jumped in on that one. I was really wanting to know if you had any sources for material more broad on the subject more broadly, particularly around kind of design of data viz rather than the kind of web design aspects that you normally see talked about.
Yeah,
very little guidance material on
so
this.
The short answer is no. I am kind of cobbling together from, as I say, personal experience. One of the only ways I found about it, and this shows a lack of material on it, is my role got moved into a digital and data team, and they were making web apps, and I was making my happy little visualizations, and then someone came along and went, well, that's not accessible. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about, dude. So even as a neurodiverse person, I didn't know there was a thing there. So I haven't seen anything that's like, here's the one big book. I think definitely I've seen stuff on Tableau. They have like an accessibility product owner. They're trying to address it in terms of their tool. I think there is a gap, absolutely, for talking about it in the same way, as you say, that we talk about web design. There's probably people on LinkedIn that are also doing good material and good content on it, but in terms of it being formalized training in any way, I don't think I have seen that yet. If anyone ever sees anything contrary to what I've just said, do fire it on. It'd be good to use it.
Brilliant, thanks very much.
Cool.
Got a couple of thank yous as well, Jen, just so you see them.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, so the ADHD and the voiceover thing, I'd recommend everyone, if you haven't tried it, you will have an inbuilt one on your laptop. Go and just find out how to turn on the speech thing. It can be very overwhelming. I think there is an element of it. People should maybe get training when they're given these assistive tools in some way, because I switched on, I was like, oh, it's just shouting at me. Like, one of the things with the speech things is, if you all do this in signatures, on LinkedIn, on your email. So I used to have Jen Gates, pipe, digital and data, whatever it was. When a screen reader reads that, it goes Jen Gates, pipe, digital and data, because it sees the little thing as something it needs to shout about. So some of the assistive tools that people go, this would be a great tool for you, they don't work for people. Absolutely, Martin. It's difficult to kind of go, that's not working. I still haven't quite found my best route for how I can learn things that aren't reading. I still have to cobble things together, and I'm a little bit more hands-on. Like, I prefer to try it, have a temper tantrum when it doesn't work, and then get someone to talk to me about how to actually fix it as well. So yeah, even though there are kind of things that people go, this is the magic fix, as Rebecca touched on, it's not the magic fix for everybody with that same condition. Everyone's going to have little nuances even between those as well. And then more thank yous. Thank you very much for the thank yous. We could get lost in a loop of saying thank you, couldn't we?
Right, Jen, we do really appreciate your time and a really well-structured thorough talk, so thank you. I'm sure we will touch on some of the areas of these questions in later talks as well, but it's really nice to see everybody here and such an engaging group as well. So hopefully see you all again, and Jen, thank you very much for your time.
No problem. Thank you all for listening to me on this vendetta I now have. If you want to ping me on Slack with any questions, and also anything where you think I've been wrong, I do like it when clever people tell me I'm wrong. And you can find me on LinkedIn under Jen Gates 14 as well. But thank you very much, guys. That's been brilliant.
Brilliant. Enjoy the heat wave, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.